Hi, Martine.
Hello. Hello,
Hey,
Brent.
we have sound and visuals. That's a great. I just wanted to make sure
Good
that
to go.
Carron's got us as well. We'll just wait. I'm sure she can join us in a minute.
Of course. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on In Conversation today. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Um,
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
well, while we're waiting for Carron to join us, why don't you just tell us where you're calling in from?
I am actually in Perpignan in the south of France.
Right.
Yeah, close to the Catalonia Spanish border. And I talk about that because it influenced my practice a lot. So yeah.
Well, it's clear that location is very important at this site. In your
Absolutely.
Well, why don't we, while I'm waiting for Karen to join us, why don't you tell us what you mean by that? Why Perpignan specifically? Why is that?
I mean, not Perpignan specifically, but the fact to live at close to a border, it shifts something in the sensation and experience of sight and passing through, and history. There's a lot of history, people passing from one country to another to escape dictatorship, So as an artist and doing action art where your body is the main material, you feel all these things, and it becomes primer material to inspire the work, definitely.
And again, just again, while we're waiting for our other guests to join us, we're having a little technical issue there. Let's go back to some basics. I know
Mhm.
action art is important in your own practice, but just in case anyone's encountering, live art, performance art, and public art for the first time, what do you mean by action art, and what does that entail?
Well, in my case specifically, is I work a lot in the public space, and so I don't have an invited audience, you know. So I don't consider it as a performance for that reason, because mainly when you're doing a performance, it's in front of an audience, and for me is accidental. The audience is accidental most of the time. I can do performance in spaces, galleries, and festivals, and so on. But lately, I've been really focusing on public space, and it's not the same rapport, to people and to the action by itself, because often it's shorter and it's riskier also. And I started to find that it makes more sense to me, because also the term performance nowadays in our societies is really used for many, many things. It's political performance, it's sport performance, it's working performance as business, and so I feel that art, action art is or should be outside of this, let's say.
Hey, what are you working on currently?
I actually, these days, I'm working on inviting other artists in the region to public collective encounters in order to meet. After all these lockdowns, we found out that what we really need as artists is to meet and to exchange and to talk about our practices and how do we want it to be and to present it, and what's the alternative to institution here. And so I started to invite other people. I call this action conversation. And so I organize things in the public space outside of formal events, and we gather and we work for an hour or two, and then we talk about our practices, and we challenge one another with questions and, you know, different ways of working and seeing. And it's been really it's been really interesting to do that. I mean, of course, you know, it's difficult with respect. I think it's something that people also should know as artists, and especially when you're doing actions and performance. It's not lucrative, you know. So, but it's also important that it isn't, in a way, you know.
Let's talk a little bit more about your practice, but I want to know a few things, like who your influences are, for example, and how you came to this, you know, to this specific type of performance. You know, can you remember how you first encountered this kind of performance art, and what your influences were?
Well, actually, I'm more of a self-taught artist, so I at first didn't have any model, honestly, to be frank. And it's really by, you know, starting to do things on my own, and then encountering other artists telling me, well, you know, you should really look at this and this and this. I worked with durational performances for a long time. And then in 2013, I worked with, in Montreal, in Canada, because I'm from Montreal. And I worked with an art center called Dardar, and they only work with public space. They develop public space projects. And it's really that, you know, I touched before a little bit of public space work, but from that time, I really committed myself to this path of, I really wanted to challenge my practice. I wasn't really satisfied, you know, with just the way it was going. And yeah, I really wanted to challenge myself to the public space, and because it's a huge risk, you know, you can plan to a certain point. And I guess that's what I was looking as well. And then the more I go, the less visible I am, I guess, you know. And there's many ways of working in the public space. It's just that for me, the best way so far is infiltrating context, where people don't know that I'm doing an artwork, you know.
That's kind of fascinating, because a lot of the time your audience don't know that they are your audience, I suppose. And sometimes you must have people look at you kind of like you're a lunatic in certain situations, performing certain.
Yes, and also it raises issues about how we are reacting to mental health in the public space. You know, often people will look at me like I'm a bit strange, and of course, I mean, I'm not doing strange thing per se, but I think that even though people don't know, they feel, they really do. They feel that it's just the way that you present yourself, the way that you are present in your body in a public space may seem different to people. Also, the way we are attentive when we're in a working mode, you know. And so you can add just a little line and people will feel that, okay, something is strange, what's going on, you know. And sometimes it can bring some conversation, of course. and this is not something you can plan in advance. And I guess this is really what to me was important in that kind of work, where I felt that the practice was really alive and could be renewed at any moment, you know.
Do you feel it's very collaborative with the people around you when you're performing or giving a sort of an action art performance? Do you interact with those who are around you in the space?
Well, not necessarily, but that doesn't mean that I don't consider it as a collaboration, because the way I see it, the site in itself becomes part of it. So people, passersby, for example, if you're in the space, you're looking at an empty space, and then somebody crosses the street, already something's been added. And it's part of it. You can't ignore it, you know?
Yeah.
In that sense, you don't need to add something spectacular. Everything is there. So how to work with it, how to adapt, and how to be attentive. I think this is what, to me, that makes the difference.
And you mentioned that you have given performances or you've exhibited in sort of more traditional spaces, kind of like museums or shows. Is that very different to when you're, in more of a public sphere? If you're, say if you're outside of a gallery and you're interacting with people, do you find that the process is a lot different, or I guess people are in that space to be, entertained by art or by performance, and I guess they go in there with expectations. So I guess your interaction with people in that space must be quite different.
Well, yeah, even if they don't go for being entertained, they are an art audience. And that's the difference. I guess when you're in the public space, you encounter, human beings, and you're sort of anonymous, and at the border of being visible. And I think this is what I am also looking for, is that I am not more important than the people who are working daily or passing through this specific street, and I consider the position of an artist to be an humbling position. And if you want to add something to what's already going on, you've got to be subtle, and you've got to be humble. You can't just, I guess some people do, but and there's all kinds of actions and performance, and I'm a very good audience when it comes to that. But of course, as an artist, you go to not necessarily what's comfortable or what you can do, but what is also is going to push the limits of your practice,
Obviously, we've been all going through the pandemic, and that's had quite an impact on the world from top
Absolutely.
to many different ways. But how has it affected your practice? Can you speak on that? Are there any specific ways that the pandemic definitely affected your practice, or the way that maybe the audience might have interacted with you, received your work? Because I think that's quite a lot of it. And what in conjunction with that, what will be really good, and I want to bring Carron in on this as well, is the impacts of technology and the virtual space, because for a long time, as a performance artist or a public artist, or an artist who utilizes the public sphere, you weren't able to do that, I imagine, or you probably had a very limited audience, even if you were walking down the street in Perpignan or Chicago.
I guess Perpignan doesn't have as many people as Chicago, but for sure, the way I was already working, in a way, it didn't have a big impact on my work because I was already working in this invisible matter, you know. And sometimes, yes, of course, it's related to art events, and sometimes is completely independent. But I think what shifted is a palpable sense of strangeness in the air, and the way people would interact and look at one another, and the fear, you know, the constant fear of others. And this really changed, also because the first lockdown, if you remember, I don't know about where you are, but here we had 1 hour a day where we could go out, and within a specific perimeters, you know, which already is a sort of performance, you know, to always go in the same the same circuit. But I guess there was for me, it was very febrile, you know. I felt really vulnerable in that sense, where just encountering others in the street would be a sensitive matter, you know. And I mean, of course, we all know that working with technology, specifically live streaming for performance, is not the ideal, but it's another side, you know. That's really the way I approach it. And I'm not trying to make the same work with this that I would do, you know, in the public space or in a gallery, for example. It's not the same. You don't have the live component, but of course, live streaming can bring other tools, you know. Like, even if you you have technical problems and sometimes you freezes, and there's all kinds of things happening.
I was going to say, it's pretty live, feels pretty live right now. Trying to bring.
It's pretty. Yeah, exactly. But all of this is part of the reality, and I think when you work with action art and performance, you don't try to hide the reality. You work with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Well, I've got a few more questions on that, but I just wanted to say to our audience, we are very lucky to be joined here by Martine Viale, and if you would like to ask any questions, please put them in the comment section, and I will pose those to our guest. So please do drop your questions in, and we will try to get through them. I suppose one of the things that interested me, we work a lot at Intellect with dance studies, with practicing dancers, dance, you know, as a major art form that we focus on through our publishing, and being joined by many dancers at conferences or during the In Conversations, they have often spoken about the liberating notion that kind of came out of the pandemic by doing these performances online through the virtual space, which was democratizing access to what is often considered quite an elitist art form, in a sense. You know, dance, you know, from a ballet perspective, often is an elitist form that everyday people may not be able to afford to go to, or may not know where to interact with it, and you know, it is kind of in the ivory tower. Or just, you know, say with more underground movements or performative elements that are happening in the street and things, a lot of people wouldn't encounter it. Whereas with a live stream, through social media, through all these different elements, we're able to actually widen access to these art forms that, you know. So how do you feel about that? Do you think that the pandemic did allow you to reach a broader audience?
It's a good question, actually, because the strange thing about live streaming is that you don't really have an idea. I mean, you do in a way, because you're kind of seeing if there is people or not, but when you are in the middle of doing an action, you're not paying attention to how many people. So it is a strange feeling. Mind you, to me, the way it happened is through Carron Little, who's the directress of Out of Sight, which at the base was a festival in a public space in Chicago. And I believe I was there in the first edition was 2011.
Well, that's what I heard.
Yeah, it's quite a long time. And she reached out to a whole bunch of artists who has been part of the festival, asking us if we would agree to do performances online. And none of us did that before, obviously, you know, it was the 2020. And I think that, you know, the way Carron brought it and her expertise, and she's a very caring and attentive person. And we would have meetings together. And I think that what really got to me was more than the live stream was the idea of building a community, of reaching out to others in different parts of the world through this live streaming, and meeting and expressing ourselves about what the pandemic was doing to each of us, and how to continue our work. And so, you know, little by little, we built that platform, which, again, it's another site for us to explore. And none of us are really expert in this, but we learn as we go. And then we created a Flow Symposium last year, and there's another one this year. And so, you know, the platform is growing and is really bringing a lot of people to a more experimental approach, which is also what we need as artists, is, you know, to keep on experimenting. And yeah, so I think the new technology, I say thank you for having this, because, you know, it's today we can talk, even though it's not perfect, we can reach out and talk. And I think this is the most important.
No, definitely. I completely agree with that. And it may not be without its technical hiccups and issues, but you know, it's we at Intellect, we didn't even consider doing these in conversation interviews until the pandemic, because it's out of that. You know, you can't go to conferences, you can't go to live events, you can't host authors at the office and film things. So this became our, you know, our best mode of operation for quite some time. But of course, it's brought, you know, the artists and the scholars that we work with to a much broader audience. And even if they don't tune in here, we're able to disseminate these videos and people's opinions to a much broader audience through YouTube channel, through our different platforms that we use, Facebook and other social media, for example, and tap into other people's networks and build quite, you know, diverse ones as a result of it, which has been really, really cool. Other than
Absolutely.
I was going to just say, other than your own sort of practice and experiments with technology, have there been any particular experiences you've had, you know, of interacting with other artists or other creatives that you've thought were particularly exciting or interesting in their use of either technology, or just you found them to be quite profound as a result?
Well, again, I think you know, through the Out of Sight platform, there's been a lot of diversity and in practices. And last year, for example, we focused on the publication of Marilyn Arsam, which is she's a Boston-based artist with like, I don't know, 50 years of career, and you know, very profound and touching practice and public space and durational. And this year, as you know, we have Alastair McLennan publications. So I think that more than one specific person or performance, I think what really get to me is it's the diversity. It's how we can expand and reach out to different audiences, and to it's in a way it's part of education, you know, that there's so many ways of working with performance, and in a way, the live stream and the symposium online are really helping us to communicate these diverse practices, you know. Because if you go to an event, so most of the time will be curated by somebody who's choosing to have a coherence within the event and the practices. But then, yes, of course, we're doing that, but also it's from the start is very important for us to, you know, broaden and challenge the way we're thinking about practices. So bringing people that are very different in the way they make work, and bring these people to talk about these practices, and then through workshops also. Workshops are really important. But then again, at first it's like, how do you make workshops online?
Oh, that was a question I was gonna
Yes.
Yeah, they're fantastic. But yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about your workshops and how you've encountered that challenge as well.
Well, yeah, at first I was like, I don't know how to do this, you know. But I have to say I really liked it. I really liked it because, again, when you don't try to hide the fact that this is new to you and you're not comfortable and you feel a little vulnerability, people respond to that as well, you know. And the participants weren't sure either. So, and it's like, but our passion is action art in the public space. We're passionate about that. And it's like, how do we relate it? And again, it wasn't, and I've been clear from start when I started the workshop, it's like, to me, it's not about making performance and then showing to no, we're going to explore what can this bring to us and question it. And you know, it's not going to be perfect. There's all going to be things happening. So how are we going to work with this and exchange? And, you know, again, it was about an encounter with these participants, which was really rich, you know.
So unfortunately, Carron, who was going to join us, and we will be able to get her in, but we might not be able to do this together.
We will get there.
but
yeah.
But she is engaging with us and asks you to share the story about the live performance from Tunis.
Yeah, that was really special because this artist, Sophia Ben Zayed, she joined my workshop, the second workshop I did through the Out of Sight platform, and she decided to, because one of their tasks was to live stream. So we did a collaboration with Carron where I would give some instruction about the workshop, and then she would train them to live stream themselves. But then, you know, Tunis is another reality, and Sophia was taking a lot of risk going into places where there was cafe with only men, you know, and it was nighttime, and she was alone as a woman with her phone live streaming herself, you know. And so it was kind of nerve-wracking for us looking at this, you know, what's going to happen? What is this reality? And people wanted to interact with her. And she felt a little bit of the danger, you know, and this is also part of, like when I said at the beginning, you don't need to add too much spectacular things and acting weirdly in the streets because it's already happening, you know, and you've got to be careful how you do things. And of course, if you're having your phone somewhere, you know, there was another artist in a workshop. She decided to give her phone to a passerby and say, "Can you film me?" You know, so which is absolutely interesting because then you get into relational work, but in another way, because it's like all these tourists asking for people to take their pictures in front of La Tour Eiffel, for example, you know, or anywhere. So you reverse, you know, it's reversing situations. And I think this is really only something that can happen in the public space.
Do you think that in light of the last few years, that the potential audience for action art and performance art in general are more literate now as a result of things like technology, through live streaming, through social media, and just interactions, everyone using cameras all the time? Do you think that there's potentially a broader and more sophisticated audience now than ever before?
Well, I hope so. I really hope so. I mean, you know, I think sophistication comes with time and seeing a lot of different things and hearing conferences and taking workshops and, you know, educating yourself really. And by living your life in such a way. But definitely, I'm interested to do actions for many different people and contexts, you know, and so broadening the audience is what we wish, for sure. You know, for example, with this experimental sound studio with who we partner for doing the live stream events, you know, gamers are coming to that.
Right, that's kind of
that platform. So, you know, I'm curious how many of them are tuning in to see our events, but definitely it is something that really attracted all of us. It's like, well, this is an opportunity to touch a broader audience that for sure naturally wouldn't necessarily go, you know, maybe some, yes, but in general, you know, although it's hard to say in general, but for sure, I think that, you know, more people are encountering performances and being really interested to engage with this art form. So, you know,
I wanted to say in conjunction with that, or maybe conversely to what I just said a moment ago, is how do we encourage more people to interact with this kind of art? How do we encourage a broader audience? And do you think we should? But it seems to me to be such maybe a democratic form that it could potentially touch a greater audience in many different ways. Is that something you would? It sounds like you're keen to interact with lots of different audiences.
Well, for sure, working in the public space bring that aspect. Mind you, people don't know. They don't know if it's happening. Some people will ask questions, definitely, but most people don't. By doing things online also, and also as Carron is mentioning right now, some of these people, the gamers, came to the Flow Symposium afterwards. So, you know, but of course, we're not there to force people, you know. I think that action art, performance art remains something that is not live stream. And it's also very good that it's like this, you know, because it gives us permission to stay free and to keep experiment and to keep pushing the boundaries, you know. It's not for everyone, but you know, I think we need to be trusting that the people who really want to engage with are going to come and are going to more and more educate themselves about it, you know. I'm looking at Corin's.
Yeah,
Yeah, public places exist online as well. Yeah, exactly. For me, this is, like I said, another site.
well, yeah. I
You
mean,
know?
think about just to use gaming as an example, especially
Yeah.
you know younger kids and things. Like they're often they may well now spend much more time in an online public space in terms of maybe like
Mm.
you know like a they're playing a game with people from all over the world in an online environment. And yeah, and that might be them interacting with more people in that format than they would in a street or at you know outside of school or something. You know, so it's
Yeah, and the good thing about being in a public space with your phone is that nobody knows because everyone has a phone. It's so common, and everyone is in front of the screen, inattentive to the presence. You know, you cross somebody, but yet you're reading. People are reading in their cars, which is quite dangerous. But you know, it's there's a filter there. And I think that's maybe why people are somehow subconsciously knowing that something is happening, is that they see you present,
yeah.
you know, doing something with full concentration and awareness. And it's like, what's going on there? And it's kind of slowing the time, you know.
Well, I've got an idea. Well, I really want to bring in Carron. So
I know.
we can't seem to make it happen using the usual methods. So would you mind hanging up for a minute, and then I'm going to try and bring her in, and then
And then I can write messages.
yeah, then you can bombard us, and you know
Yes, I will.
you can
Thank you, James.
from the digital public space.
Yeah, exactly.
Bring you back in a minute. So thanks
Yeah,
for joining us. We will try and bring in our other guests now.
yeah.
Thank you so much, and we'll try and bring you back.
Thank you so much.
Let's give this a go.
Very good to talk with you. Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Crikey. That was painful. Talk about live. Jeez. Anyway, how are you?
I'm doing all right. A bit hot in Chicago. It's gone from winter to summer in 24 hours. So
I know. I was there until Saturday. I'm now in Devon, England.
Oh.
I was in New York on Sunday. I was in London on Monday, but before that I was in Chicago. So, yeah.
Whereabouts in Devon? Because you know that's where I grew up.
Really? Well, you and I then have got quite a lot of connections because we're both. Well, I wasn't born in Scotland, but Campbell Scottish ancestry. I've just learned that you're from Scotland originally, but then obviously we've both spent a lot of time in Chicago. But I'm in Columpton in Devon, so mid Devon, so not too far.
I grew up in Elfordtown, you know, Yalverton.
Yeah, near the moor.
Yes, on the moors.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so well, all right. Well, let's start there then. So, tell me, give me this is your life. So, tell me, how did you end up from the moor to out of sight? What's what's this transition here in a nutshell?
Yes, well, actually, the first house we bought in Plymouth, we bought because it it felt like a theatre, because my father was in the theatre, but he was a theologian.
Cool.
But when I moved, when I was about 13, I moved to the north of England because my mum was doing peace studies. And it was in Bradford that I really blossomed and got into public performance. Okay. And I got roped into working on the Bradford Mela Festival. Yeah. And, you know, I have to, like, Bradford was a very working class town, and there was a lot of racism towards the Indian and Pakistani community that had migrated in the 1950s to work in the mills.
Right.
And so the city decided to sponsor this cultural festival called the Mela. And they invited me to coordinate the children's area.
Oh,
And
cool.
so I was suddenly exposed to all of this diverse public performance, dancers from Rajasthan, performance artists, you know, doing stuff on a bench. But I ended up doing that for 8 years, even when I moved to London to study at art college. They kept inviting me back. And what I realized is how the Public Performance Festival was actually expanding joy and love into the public space.
Right.
And then what happened a few years later, once I was living in London, I would go home to visit my family. And one day, me and my brother were walking down the street, and they'd built a new police station right in the middle of the Asian community, the Indian Pakistani community, and with a castle-moat wall. And there was also a huge problem with fascists coming in from Wakefield and beating people up on the streets. And so, you know, the city decided to stop the festival and fund and put more funding into the police. And the city has lost its heart. You know, it's declined again. And this is a problem that we're seeing all over the world internationally, is the more we fund violence, the more violence expands. And, you know, whereas, you know, the more cities fund public performances like our program, they'll see an expanding joy. So, and, you know, so this is the dichotomy that we're living in. You know, Chicago is really being impacted with the militarization of the police force, and it's having a huge problem, you know, violence. Yes, and I think that's what's interesting about Alistair McClelland's book, you know, because he has a lifelong practice working in Belfast through the Troubles. And so with the up-and-coming online public performance symposium that we're organising, is really about expanding the discourse of practice and how our work can really, you know, how, and actually Brian Patterson puts it in a really great way. He says, public performance can awaken consciousness.
Yeah, I think anyone in their right mind could agree with that. Well, I just want to stop you for 1 second, because you have mentioned, of course, a new publication, a very important new publication, dealing with the work of Alistair McClennan. So, and that is Actional Poetics, Ash, She, He, the Performance Actuations of Alistair McClennan, 1971 to 2020, and that is published by Intellect and edited by Sandra Johnston, Sherry Driver, and Paula Blair. Is that a book that you're familiar with as of yet?
Oh yes, you know, I've read it cover to cover.
Any?
And we're you know, in partnership with you at this symposium, we're offering symposium attendees a 30% discount because we really want to expand the discourse.
Definitely, and it's an absolute pleasure to be partnered with you. And let's jump into that partnership a little bit. But look, tell us about the symposium. What do you have planned? And how can people?
Well, you know, Martine was actually talking, well, you were asking Martine about technology and how we're innovating technology. And so we have practice-based workshops, which is a real incongruity when we're talking about public performance online. So we're working with the facilitators and we really work with the symposium attendees to facilitate real, you know, live performance outdoors, and, you know, an in real time sharing in the space and context of the workshop space. So I've figured out some technology, some ways to jinx the technology so we can do that. I wasn't very successful jinxing the technology today. But,
All bad tech, we've got out. We've dealt with that. It's like a voodoo. We're done with it now. You're going to be fine.
But yeah, so, and then, so we're really creating these unexpected encounters for the public in different spaces around the world in the context of the symposium, because people come from all different, you know, cultures. So it becomes this international sharing. And after last year, we also have an open call where our artists, practitioners can sign up to present their work at the symposium in the form of a performative lecture or an artist presentation. So 50% of the presentations are performative lectures where the audience will be participating. And Paul Quillard is kicking that off with gesture and the materiality of animateness. So
you're creating a platform to sort of disseminate live performance to the public in general, and then that started off as something that was in person in real life or whatever, and that now you're utilizing technology and the virtual realm to present that to a global audience.
Yes. So it's, yeah, we're really, yes, it's like this web really that is, you know, we've been very much based in Chicago for the last 11 years, but through the pandemic, you know, we've been able to function in, you know, to facilitate these global connections.
I mean, congratulations on that. And for me, I think the pandemic for me is all about silver linings, because, you know, obviously many people have been affected in a negative way, but at the same time, there are a lot of silver linings. It has engendered creativity, and for people of all walks of life, artists, publishers, chemists, whoever they be, to kind of work within these parameters and these restrictions, and then find creative ways to break them down. And it seems like you guys have done a very good job of that, and that what's actually happening as a result of the pandemic, you know, restricting you, is that now more people are going to be able to participate, more people are going to, you know, to interact with this kind of, with all these different artists, and again, just to go what you were saying to start with, and the nature of the world we live in right now, it seems like performance art and these kind of symposiums are more important than ever, and potentially could reach a much wider audience, an audience that maybe needs this kind of work and performance.
Yes, you know, when I was going to art college, I mean, nobody, you know, was talking about performance art, you know, and certainly not public performance art.
And they probably weren't saying anything good about it either, to be honest. The people you did have probably were detractors, you know. Well, that's not proper. You know, I imagine getting a few of those dissenting voices, whereas now it seems to be, people seem to be much more open-minded. And again, to go back to what I was saying with Martine, I feel like technology such as this and interactions like this are helping break down some of those barriers, where people maybe perceive performance art to be kind of elitist or not for them. And I think now more people are interacting with it and being like, oh, well, this is no different to music or no different to anything else that I encounter in a public space. I don't know how you feel about that, but.
Well, yes, I mean, yes, music, and I think, you know, in a previous interview conversation you had with Sinja, Stanley Nina, you know, she was talking about, you know, performance geographies.
Yeah.
And I think this is, you know, I call it an unexpected encounter because it is this like special connection that you create. It's like this meeting that you create with somebody in the public sphere. And, you know, how music gives you joy, you know, and it can kind of spark you to dance, etc. You know, it becomes an embodied exchange. And through that embodied exchange, that is where transformation can occur. And I think that actually that's what's really important in the conversation with Martine. She mentioned responding to sight, which you also published about the work of Martine Arsam. And, you know, that was the book that we focused on. You know, it's been quite coincidental that, you know, these books have come out at the time that we're creating this symposium as well, and have really helped in nourishing and expanding the discourse as well for practitioners. So it's been a lot of beautiful confluence.
No. And I was just going to say, we were very lucky in the comments. I did notice that the author of Responding to Sight, Jenny Klein, was able to like jump in. So that was great to have her. So it does seem like there's a really a nice fraternity between everyone, and that these things are all coming out at the same time. And again, facilitating, you know, dialogue and conversations.
Yeah, I mean, that is really at the heart of what Out of Sight is about. You know, I went to, you know, because, you know, whether it's online, whether it's in public space, we have a steward team, you know, because performance art isn't the kind of regular thing that people see, you know, or are familiar with. So we have a steward team that helps facilitate a dialogue with the public, you know, so that they can start to think about, you know, so they're really processing and thinking about the ideas. And so, and we've carried that ethos of, you know, really facilitating a dialogue into the online spaces that we've created. So.
Oh, very cool. So, I mean, that kind of links with my question to Martine earlier, just about how you are trying to build the audience. So it sounds like you're actively engaging with the, for want of a better term, the general public, and really trying to bring them into the fold. Is that sounds to be fair?
Yes. It's we're very much focused on the work is with and for the public. And I mean, let me give you an example. I mean, one, in 2013, there was serial sexual assaults in a specific area of the neighborhood where we tend to work, or where we've been supported a lot over the years to create the performances. And so we were asked to, you know, produce more performances in that area. And a group of kids, you know, I think 18, 19 or so, came up to this one performance, and they stood there and they laughed for like 40 minutes, you know, and they said, this is what we need in Chicago. We need things that bring more joy. We, you know, we're so tired of the violence and the trauma, you know, because we're living in a city where segregation, you know, hasn't just, it actually traumatizes a huge part of the population because of where they live and, you know, the structures that are functioning in those areas, you know.
I guess for anyone who doesn't know, Chicago is a truly wonderful city, and a city with a great heritage of the arts, of all the arts. But it's also been a very, probably America's most segregated city, and one that has always been tinged by extreme violence. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of segregation, of course, on class lines, but predominantly on racial lines. And it's a city that is still, and perhaps, you know, more so now than in recent years, is struggling a great deal with violent crime, and with the effects of segregation, and I don't know, many different things beyond my comprehension. But you know, I feel like it's one of those cities that, because it has such an the art so at the heart of it, and culture so at the heart of it, it's kind of, that for me is definitely the way to break down these barriers and to bring people into the fold. And just when I was there recently, I was speaking to African-American taxi driver who had an encounter with some kids in their neighborhood, you know, a rougher neighborhood on the south side, which is traditionally a black area. And you know, they were saying that they were speaking to these kids in the neighborhood. You know, this was an older woman who was like not taking any mess going around, but that these kids hadn't been downtown. Now, you know, downtown Chicago is one of the greatest architectural delights in the world. It's got like amazing access to culture, lots of free museums, one of the greatest art museums on earth. And you know, these kids, they live, you know, only like 5-10 miles away, but they'd never come downtown. And their response was that they didn't think they were able to go downtown, basically. So, you know, you've got like 18-year-old kids who've lived, born and raised in Chicago. You know, this is just an anecdote, but you know, here it is. And they've never been downtown. They've never seen those statues. They've never been around the Art Institute and all these other things. And there's something there for everyone. And and that just struck me as a story, considering I've spent so much time in that city, and I've spent a lot of time down south in the Pullman districts, and I've spent a lot of time in the downtown and up north. And you know, we work at Insight with the University of Chicago Press, and I believe you were based at the University of Chicago yourself, right?
I have given, I've been invited to give lectures there, you know, annually, but I was working at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. But yeah, so I also worked in Austin with kids in an elementary school. And those kids had not been downtown, and we took them downtown. And part of the program, I was helping these kids to go to kind of transition into high schools. And really trying to facilitate that process. So I got some kids into some really good high schools, and who are actually now at university. So, you know, it takes that one-to-one interaction to change a person's life. But one of the issues that we're dealing with, you know, due to segregation, is the fear young people have, you know, even just going from the school to their home, you know, because of the racial violence that exists. So it's, yeah, well, we could talk all day about that.
That's a big topic, you know, and one that I'm probably not the best equipped to discuss, but you know, I definitely would say that Chicago is at the heartland of a lot of things that are going on in America right now. A city that's often forgotten. And of course, I live in New York regularly. So to be in New York and then to go to Chicago, there's a definite different sense. There's a different, you know, it's there's like definitely you can feel the fear that pervades the city. It's very hard to put your finger on, but yeah, it's you know, it's be a difficult place to grow up, like, that's for sure. But
it is.
Good for you, and for people who are, you know, engaging with different communities and trying to show them opportunities to, whether they be for education or access to culture. And I think that the work that you're doing is very important, but also that it shows that performance art, and of course Chicago is rich history of performance art in public space, and for that very purpose of political engagement and breaking down these barriers between different people. But yeah, well, like you say, we could talk about that all day, but we've only got a very brief amount of time left. But I wanted to ask you a couple of things. First of all, Without a Site. So first year it went digital was last year, doing it digitally again this year. Now, just tell people a few of the ways that they can be involved. I know that, for example, there's a lot of, there's a website, there's social media. You have a really good handle on all of those things, but just give people a few access points so they can find out more and maybe come and join the party.
Yes, yes. So we are Out of Sight _chi, as in as in, the abbreviation of Chicago, but also connected to embodied practices. And so that we are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we're on Twitter as Out of Sight _chi. And it's site, SITE, as in place, not site, which is, you can register. So the conference is called Flow Embodying Site, SITE, and so you can register. There's a website for that specific program called Flow Symposium. I'll pop that in the chat, or maybe Martine is around and can do that. And that is so, and people can register for the Flow Symposium through that website directly. And there's an ebb and flow registration, and there's a steady stream, so you can move with flexibility through all the programming.
Well, it's going to be an awesome event, and also let's just you 11 years in now, so it's pretty impressive as well. Such a wealth depth of artists you've had involved before, and I know there's lots of content online that people can interact with. But I did want to ask you about another book that you've been involved with that was, well, not obviously responsible for, but we were partnered with, and that is my great friend and collaborator Sharon Loudon, the artist as culture producer. I believe you were involved in that project. And
yes.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your chapter.
Yeah, so the chat, gosh, it's been a long time since
Sorry,
I wrote that. In 2006, I think it was published in 2017. And the chapter, actually, Sharon invited me to talk about Out of Sight, and to really talk about issues of equity, because I've really, with Out of Sight, I've worked voluntarily to create the program because it is a love of my, it's my lifelong passion to expose the broader public to art and culture, and to create conversation about art and culture. So yes, so the chapter kind of outlines or outlined my ethos at that time, and really thinking about how we can create equitable pay structures for artists. And it was in line with the wages for artists that has since happened. And that was one of the reasons why we moved online during the pandemic, was to create an artery of financial support for artists throughout the pandemic time. So last year we supported 50 public performances from around the world. And, just by creating partnerships with different organizations like Experimental Sound Studio in Chicago.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the support for artists has actually dried up in this time, and it's still not returned. And
well, I should say we should give you and Sharon and other people yeah, who are engaging like this, your flowers as you deserve, because it's actually artists who are supporting artists, isn't it? Really, now there's no governmental support, the grants are drying up, etc., etc. But you know, it's artists are looking after artists and building broader communities, and fundamentally, you know, that's how we can monetize these things and keep, you know, keep funded.
Yes, yeah. It's literally put food on the table for artists, you know, and that's what we're you know, we've been focused on doing. And yeah, it's really I think you know, academic institutions really need to be thinking about how they're bringing artists into their institutions to create dynamic programming. You know?
No, well put. And I think that's what the Living and Sustaining a Creative Life book series and
Well, I've lost.
have a look at Living and Sustaining a Creative Life and The Artist as Culture Producer. 2 books, but we have more coming out in the series, all about how you can live, survive and sustain a creative practice, and of course help create dynamic interactions between you know, the general public, the art public, and artists generally. Whoa, right, Corinne, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm very glad we managed to get together again.
Get connected.
Have you on again soon, and we can talk about some other things as well. But I really want to thank you for joining me, for your patience, and of course just for your really wonderful insight, and just the passion you bring to all of these things. Everyone out there, go and check out Out of Sight and the Flow Symposium, and we'll make sure that more information is available online through our social media channels and through various other things. So do keep an eye out. Is there any final thoughts you would like to just add before we finish off?
Well, yes, I mean, thank you for having both me and Martine today. It's always a pleasure to chittle with you. You know, and yes, please register, please sign up, and we hope, and also the performances will be live publicly on June 17th and June 18th on Experimental Sound Studio's Twitch channel. So that's going to be a real treat. So hope everybody can tune in and join us then. So thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure. And we'll have you back to discuss how things are going and how things are developing, of course. So thanks very much, and thanks for everyone who joined us today. Thank you again for everyone's patience. But yeah, so glad we made this happen, even with a few tech hitches. Enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy that swampy heat in Chicago, and best of luck with all of the Out of Sight projects. I'm so glad that we are partnered with you on it.
Thank you, James. Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.